So hey everyone, welcome to this collaboration and first in the Ask the Expert session here on Boatingtube in collaboration with Pacific Yacht Systems. I've been a great fan and viewer of Pacific Yacht Systems content on YouTube, and for me it's a bit of an honor, and I say I'm a bit kind of starstruck to have the one and only Jeff Cote from Pacific Yacht Systems here this morning. Jeff, how are you doing?
Doing wonderful. Thanks for having me on your show. And I'm also honored that somebody wants to talk to me about boating. To be honest, I think this whole YouTube thing is making people feel a little bit maybe more important than they are. I'm just another boater like the rest of us. So thank you for the occasion.
That's cool.
I'm blushing if you can't see it underneath. I'm getting red here. The beard is hiding most of the red area.
I mean, it is quite. I mean, Pacific Yacht Systems yourself are prolific on YouTube. Again, I've watched a lot of your stuff, your seminars. You've got the literally daily content on Ask PYS now, and I'm
Yeah.
amazed that clearly you're a business and you sell the stuff, you sell the service, but you give out a lot of free information to boaters about wiring, cabling, batteries, charging, and the seminars you put out. I mean, what was the sort of thinking behind that at Pacific Yacht Systems to create that content?
Well, I think as boaters, there's a huge sense of collective feeling when we're on the water. Boating is not an individual sport at all. We see that in the racing. We see that in everything. There's a huge sense of, this is hard. We can't do it alone, and we need help. And there's a lot of division on land, but once you're on the water, boaters help boaters. And, maybe it could be a political divide. It could be a religious divide. It could be cultural. It could be socioeconomic, whatever, all the craziness that we have on land that separates us, which are, potentially bogus. On the water, those are gone.
Nice.
And you see that. And so that sort of sharing and helping is part of a real big attraction of people going on the water. It's almost like all these things, like I remember talking to boaters on the water, and you're like, you would never get a chance to meet these people. And likewise, they would never get a chance to meet you. And so that attraction for the water finds us, there's a certain commonality there. And I know as a boater, I was overwhelmed when I started boating. Certainly, if you're aware of it, you're going to know that it's a lot harder than you were probably told or thought. And as a boater, I think for me, I came so close. There was so much hardship on our boat when we bought it on April Fool's Day that I felt like, I'm not saying I almost gave up, but I know that a lot of people would maybe they might get frustrated if their boat is not reliable. And as a boater, I think, to be able to fulfill one's dream and to be on the water and enjoy the beauty of the world and the serenity of it and slowing down and all the things that we have a hard time doing on land, we can do that on the water. And so for me, these YouTube videos are about helping other boaters. Information is not what we really provide to our clients. Information is everywhere. It's on the internet. It's way more than that. So I'm not protective of the information. We're a service provider. And so to me, sharing information is not giving it away. I have it. People want to listen. And to be honest, the feedback that you get from some of these boaters are tear-jerking. Like you get people that are sending us emails and saying how we changed their life. We gave them confidence to their family come on the boat. How, as a human being, could that not be fulfilling?
Yeah, it's
You'd
great.
have to be dead inside. You'd have to be dead. I mean, helping others is probably an intrinsic trait of being us, right? And so for me to be able to help someone and hundreds and thousands of people everywhere just because I spend 5 minutes answering a question, the payoff seems to be 100% worth it. And that's the drive to these YouTubes, is just helping other boaters fulfill their dreams, really.
And I guess there's probably a sort of mixture of people. Some people that will take the information and will go and act on it and do it themselves. Others will kind of show it to their local technical person or their, because again, it makes you globally globally available as a company. But then there's the other people that kind of go, thank you for the information, but can you do it for me? Because I'm a bit frightened to do it myself.
Yeah,
And they obviously will then bring you in.
100%.
Yeah, so really, really interesting. So in the session, this first session, I really want to, again, I watch all the Ask PYSs and again a lot of the seminars, and I'm on a lot of the forums as well. And really, I know a lot of your specialty and expertise, and a lot of the questions you get is around sort of batteries, charging, cabling, and fusing. So I thought that would be a really kind of great place to start. The power source, charging the power
Mm,
source, and then wiring the power source. So let's start off with batteries. It's always an interesting subject around these great big lumps of lead and plastic that we stick on our boats that power all of the services, fridge, lighting, navigation, and engines and such like. And there seems to be kind of two main types. If you kind of break it down from a high level, you've got the kind of lead acid, which are
hmm
essentially are the old truck batteries, which have kind of evolved a little bit, but are still essentially truck batteries. And then there's these new fangled, whizzy lithiums that everyone's kind of talking about. Can you kind of talk us through, why would someone choose lead acid? Why would someone choose lithium, and the kind of benefits and obviously the disadvantages of both?
Yeah. The reality is there's no such thing as one size fits all. We know this in clothing, we know this in our homes, we know this in our cars, we know this in a lot of things. And I think in the marine world, it's so hard and it's so overwhelming that a lot of us think that if someone else does it, I should do it because I don't know what I want. And so therefore, if they're talking about it, I need it. And my first step is always to say, hey, listen, this is not, you're going to have to find something for you. And that for you is multiple things, right? It might be, what kind of boat do you have? What do you do with your boat? What kind of energy do you need? I mean, are you a day tripper and you're going for 4 hours out and coming back? Do you need a lithium battery if you're a power boater doing that? And so the question as an owner and as a boater is figure out what our requirements are and then basically apply solution. And this is where my engineer side of me comes in, where I'm going, let's tailor a solution to your problem, not repeat what the other neighbor or fellow boater did. Because you might have the same boat, you might be in the same town, it might be the same year, but you're going to use your boat completely differently than your neighbor. And therefore the electrical system, maybe one of them comes out of the factory perfect. And for the other boater, same boat. It could be brothers. And the other boater is doing something different. They're staying overnight. They're going out for a week. So that's the first thing to realize is that you can't really copy what your neighbor does and you found the secret sauce.
You need to look at your kind of power usage and your kind of usage of your boat.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the big two fields that you're talking about are lead acid batteries, and they come in multiple sort of flavors: flooded, absorbed glass mat, AGM, gel, fireflies, which is sort of a carbon foam AGM. And there's even more than that. And that's on one side of the sort of the spectrum. And the other side is lithium batteries. And so you've got these two camps. The lead acid batteries, like you say, have been around. They're ubiquitous. We've been using them forever. And when you're doing those sort of projects, what they offer is simplicity. At the end of the day, they're a battery, right? And you compare that to lithium. Lithium is not just a battery. Yes, it provides energy, but there is an electronic component to that battery. And I tell people all the time, a BMS is a computer. I mean, that's what it is. It's not the little pocket calculators that we had from the 1990s. This is a real full-blown computer. The people that design these BMSs are electrical engineers. They're actually programming, they're full-on intense. Like, this is not a joke, right? Because there's a certain level of automation in what the BMS has to do to make the lithium battery safe. So, if you compare one to one, you go, one is vanilla, lead acid battery. The other one has a computer, right? Now, you got to ask ourselves, and I tell this all the time, why would anyone want a computer when they can have something that's not a computer? Right? There's got to be a trade-off because one is like basically non-technical. I mean, batteries exist everywhere. You can make a battery out of, like people do these little experiments. It's not complicated.
Lemon and a bit of copper, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right? So simple versus lithium. So why would you go with something that has a computer where you can buy something that doesn't have a computer? And I think the reason why people would consider lithium would be the big reasons are saving space. So you get a lot more energy density, usable amp hours out of a lithium battery than you do flooded. So anybody who has very big space constraints,
right.
And that happens where they can't simply put more batteries, like they cannot do it. So lithium, for sure, winner there. Next one for lithium, a big win, is also weight. That less volume also translates to less weight. Racers are going to care about that. There's going to be some power boaters that are going to care about that too, that, want a really light boat, but want a lot of energy. All right, all good. So far, these are all wins, right? And everybody was like, less weight, less space. Okay, that's perfect. So those two are big selling features. The other one too, that lithium, that's a big advantage, of course, is the number of cycles. Meaning cycles is how often can you take a battery from 100% down?
I think there's a lot of confusion around that, isn't there? Because people think that's just I charged it up. That's not a cycle, is it? You go out and use a quarter of the battery or whatever, and then you go and charge it back up again. That's not a full cycle. It's from 100% down to...
Yeah, every cycle is weighed differently, right? It's like our own lives. Every day is not the same. Some days we work a lot harder, and it's a lot harder on our system than other days. Not every day in our lives is a hard day or an easy day, but every day is a day. Every cycle is a cycle. But they're weighted differently, right? So you can obviously, like if we go back to flooded lead acid battery, for example, and we take a deep cycle battery as an example, a deep cycle battery can be discharged to 50%, right? So you take it from 100 and you bring it down to 50. You can do that 300 times, let's say on a standard battery, flooded lead acid battery. But if you take that same battery and you bring it down to 0, you can only do it 50 times. Wow. So you can see that, wait a second, I'm trading off. The deeper I go on my cycle, the less cycles I have. And the opposite of bringing it from 100 to 0 is bringing it from 100 to 99. And then you'll get like 15,000. And that's what happens in our cars. Our vehicles basically offer us 5, 6, 7 years of battery starting, because we go from 100 all the way just to 99, 92, 95, and then bang again. So the battery can do 10, 15,000 cycles. What's interesting with the lithium is it gives you, let's say, something ridiculous like 5,000 cycles, all the way down to 20% of capacity. Now, that sounds great, but we've got to ask ourselves too, and that's a good one, is, am I going to be using my boat for 5,000 nights in the foreseeable future? Am I going to have my boat for 5,000 nights over the next 20 years? And what's a cycle to me? And sometimes that cycle might be a 2-day cycle, right? You might start the battery on, a Saturday morning, and you're still bringing it down, and you're bringing it down on Sunday night. So that's now 2 days was a cycle, depending on how you size the battery bank. So sometimes we have to be careful between these comparisons and saying 5,000 cycles, all these different things. Most of us, unless you're going offshore cruising and you are living on your boat, will have a hard time finding the return on investment to take advantage of those number of cycles. Most of us don't boat every day. Not every day is a cycle. So some of us only boat 30 days a year, 60 days a year. Okay, so now you're buying a battery that has 5,000 cycles. You use it 50 days a year. It's still a lot for lifetime. People to work, right? And then that's a lifetime. So this whole promise of, 100 years of battery, in 100 years, I mean, you're paying today dollar for something that is going to give you a return for 100 years. Nobody is going to be cherishing that lithium in 20 years. No, in 20 years, it's going to be something so revolutionary that is going to be garbage. 20 years from now is going to be mind blowing on the battery world. So the advantage of those cycles for lithium, and the important thing is quantifying and thinking, am I going to take advantage of that? Because that's used a lot on the internet as an advantage, but it's irrelevant if you're going to make use of it. So that was the third thing, right? We talked about the first, space, volume, and then cycles. The other one too that's really good about lithium is their ability to sustain a voltage as they're discharging. Meaning they're not like a lead acid battery is a lot like us people. You start your day, you might be a little bit more energized. And if you worked a 16, 18-hour day, you're going to be tired. You're not going to have that same oomph. And a lead acid battery, as it's depleted, the voltage drops. And as our voltage drops, then the loads, as they get lower and lower, some of the loads are more susceptible to voltage being low, and they start becoming intermittent. A prime example of that is a refrigerator. Right. Refrigerators aren't going to work, when the battery voltage is 11 volts, because the fridge doesn't sense 11 volts. It's 11 at the battery. And by the time you get to the fridge, it might be 10.2, 10.3, and the fridge is going to come out. So if your loads are pretty big, like some people are running air conditioning, stuff like that off lithium, that's a great thing. the battery doesn't sag. It just, this miracle thing. It will sag at the end, but for a long period of time, it's going to be relatively steady. That's another big win for lithium. The other big win for lithium on paper is their charge acceptance rate, and that's called CAR. So now a lot of people will flaunt this sort of concept. Oh, you know, it's got 3C, means I can recharge my battery at 3 times capacity. And they're right, 3 times capacity. But okay, so let's try it. And I gave this analogy to someone else. It's like bragging that your bank account can take any deposit. You know, my bank account can take, you can deposit $1 million if you want. I'm like, it's not going to happen. You know, nobody's going to be able to recharge a battery at 3C. 3C is, imagine 2 golf cart batteries or an 8D battery or whatever it is, like a group 30, even 2 golf carts. We're talking about, you know, in 12 volts, we're talking about 220, 240 amps hours. Do 3 times of that as capacity. That's a 660 amp alternator charger. You can't go to your channel and say, hey, listen, yeah, I'm not looking so much for a water hose to recharge my battery. I'm looking for literally an ocean. Like there's no such thing. The biggest alternators we're seeing are, you know, maybe about 300 amps. That's pretty much at 12. That's pretty much the threshold. Chargers are maxing out at maybe 150 amps at 12 volts. So then you're saying, oh, I'm going to put in how many alternators? Well, engines can't have limitless alternators. So you'll never, this is where I get a little scared. And I had another conversation with another boater on a podcast about this. And I was saying, when you start bragging about features that really don't have any benefit, then that's where you know that the conversation is not accurate. It's not truthful. Boasting about benefits that aren't really going to mean anything other than bragging, that's where you're comparing data sheets. In the boating world, that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
So to recap, lithium: space, volume, depth of discharge, cycles, the ability to take a high rate of charge. All those things are like really, and that non-voltage sagging. But then why does not everybody have that? There are some drawbacks, but the drawbacks aren't that big. You just can't take advantage of them. The challenge is that doing lithium is not straightforward.
Yeah.
It is not. It is not straightforward. And most people, unfortunately, as a boater, I tell people all the time, there's nothing wrong with do it yourself. But the first part of the do, before you even do, you have to educate. And most of us like to do more than educate. You know, that sense of let's do it. Let's just get it done. And that's where you can get a lot of troubles because they're comparing their experiences with batteries and they're going, oh, well, it's called a battery. Then therefore, you know, it's just going to be drop in replacement. And it isn't. It really isn't. It's intense. It's not easy. The challenge is the manufacturers of those batteries, some of them are offering BMSs that control only one positive post. What that means is it's like a typical battery. It looks like a battery. There's only 2 posts. There's a positive and a negative. You're like, oh, great, perfect. But what they don't realize is at one point, if you drop in a lithium battery, and this happened to a boater this summer, drop in battery lithium, didn't change the alternator, the long journey up on the coast, eventually the battery was being overcharged by an alternator. There's no communication at this point. The BMS, this is a simple BMS, right? That BMS is not talking to anybody. It's like, my job is to keep this battery safe. No problem, great. But what happened is the battery was getting overcharged. The lithium said, okay, you know what? I can't take it anymore. You're charging me, I'm full. So what it did, it's not communicating with anyone. It's just doing what it needs to do. It's a computer. It's going, I'm shutting down.
Right.
Until you start putting a load. And then the owner lost the battery bank. The battery bank was gone. It was 0 volts. And then now everything shuts down. So this is where I'm a big fan, not of the necessarily budget batteries, because to me, budget and water and not having it reliable or predictable is a problem. My philosophy is when we go boating, we want to have our lives better than on land and simpler and less stressful than our day life. And so what I recommend if we do lithium is I say, okay, go lithium, but go big, meaning buy a battery that has the ability to have both a charging post, right? Yep. So it's called dual bus, charging one and a discharge. And then have the ability to say, hey, listen, I'm not taking any more charging. I'm stopping, it's done, but the loads will keep going, right? So there's inputs and outputs. And that's where, when we do those lithium battery banks, that's what we're doing. We're definitely putting battery banks that have these dual input output, so that the BMS can control one and not the other. And that makes it a lot more reliable, but then that gets more involved. And then you have to think about too, like these alternators have a hard life. They're in an engine room. It's not warm, it's hot, and they're working hard, right, Neil? And those alternators, when they're recharging the lithium battery is so hungry, so thirsty for power, that you're basically running your alternator at max output pretty much for the duration. The battery it's going to charge all the way to 100% or near. So the alternators end up burning out. And then that's where you start putting these high output, but like heavy duty, continuous duty alternators. And then you put external regulators to recharge the lithium. So if you hear all these words, then you're going, whoa, this is not a battery anymore. Like you're telling me it's an ecosystem. Yeah, and it is. And that's where the comparison is a little bit misleading, because you can't really replace one-to-one. When you go lithium, you have to really think about the system. You have to really imagine, and how do you start the engine? Are you going to charge the engine? Now if your alternator is recharging your lithium, well, what's recharging your engine battery, right? Your engine battery is probably going to be flooded or AGM. How do you recharge different battery chemistries? It gets to a whole new level. Now, this is the world I cherish and love. It's complicated, right? It's hard. A lot of decisions, pros and cons. But if you're a typical boater and you're not wanting to geek out too far, that's where lithium becomes a little bit more questionable.
Yeah.
And the other factor, of course, and people forget this, this is not monopoly money, right? This is real dollars. And not everyone needs to drive a Lamborghini or a Bentley or whatever we want, McLaren, to go and enjoy boating. For me as a boater, I remind people, once you're on the water, it doesn't matter if you're on a 150-meter yacht or you're on a literally 5-meter yacht, you have the same view. It's the same experience. People on bigger boats don't have a better time than people on small boats. And so whatever barriers we make to ourselves to bring the bar higher and higher, to make it more expensive to go boating, the less of us are out there on the water enjoying that splendor, that beauty, that relaxation. So I tell people, it's not that lithium's for everyone. There is absolutely a need for lithium, and lithium solves a lot of great problems. But don't be fooled. You don't need lithium. Everyone doesn't need lithium. And you don't want to be in that situation, because then it would remove people from boating. And as we know, boating is not something we want to stop others from enjoying. It's an incredibly fulfilling sort of hobby or lifestyle. So that's my take between the flooded lead acid and the lithium, is that it's not for everyone. And it doesn't need to be. Not everyone needs to drive a Lamborghini. Some people do, but not everyone.
Yeah, and I guess again, I am guilty. I've done a lot of research, so I'm currently in the process of building a lithium system for our boat. We go away and stay away for a week on the time, and we want to start using the water heater, the immersion heater, through the inverter. So our power draw is gonna go up, because we want to have showers in the morning and stuff if we're away for a week. So our lead acids just couldn't take the draw. So, but yeah, it's absolutely right. We've gone from having just standard alternators charging, a start battery and a house bank, but now we're looking at, okay, we need either to go the DC route to charge the lithium off of that. And if you do that, you're not going to get a lot of amps in there, or you go direct to the alternator, and you've got to start looking at, either a Bauma or a wake speed, or, one of those kind of more advanced voltage regulators that start, reducing the field current as the capacity of the battery kind of goes up. But as you say, then the complexity, and I do love geeking out on all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of, for me, I like that and enjoy that. But as you say, I think for a lot of boaters, there could be, some confusion around the fact that there are these, as you say, drop-in lithium batteries, but then you are going to cook your alternator, or you are going to have these single charge discharge, and then you will lose kind of everything, because it will cut off. Or, I mean, worst case is you cut the power to the alternator and you'll lose your alternator. If you
it happened this summer.
Yeah, if you cut your alternator, then you need either an alternator protection device or something to just reduce the field current, rather than just completely cutting it, because you'll kill an alternator, which is very bad. So
It brings a good point, right? The question is, you know, there's a certain segment of us, and I have to always divide myself in parts. There's a person inside of me that's a geek, loves all this stuff. It's challenging, it's complicated, it's sophisticated, it's creative to do it. You know, it's a puzzle. All those things. There's the engineer in me, the geek in me that wants all of that. But then I also have to be realistic because I see pain, right? I see disappointment. You know, we do about 1,000 boats a year. So I see the disappointment on the other side. All this stuff is what I would call sales. It's marketing. It's all promises. But then we have to be considerate of the implications of those things. And when a boat is unreliable and the boat, you know, has problems, the battery bank, the BMS is acting up, the alternator burns out, you know, a lot of us don't have, you know, 52 weeks of vacation a year. Not all of us are, you know, we're working for a living and our time off is extremely precious. And I tell people, I'm like, remember, if you're going to take on complexity, it has to be for a trade-off. And there is a reason to do it. But I invite boaters, I'm like, listen, there's also something to be said. If you really don't need the battery, then why go through all this complexity to have something? Because when it fails, then at this point, you're not going to be seeing a mechanic. Like you're now an early adopter. Now you're going to be in a marina. You're going to talk to an electrician. You're going to be talking to another boater, and that boater, they can't help you. Now this is not a battery anymore. Now it's getting more complicated. And that's where I remember myself, and I see the pain in people when they lose their vacation, when their vacation that they've worked all year for, that they bought the boat years ago, but they're paying the mortgage. They're doing all the things that we're doing in anticipation. And if something stops you from fulfilling that dream or living that experience with your family, your loved ones, your friends, whatever it is, or by yourself, it can be pretty devastating. And that's where I go, okay, pros and cons. Is the complexity a requirement to get the benefits, like you were saying for your boat, where I need to run these large AC appliances that are coming off the inverter, whatever it is? But make a decision, go, yes, I am making a conscious decision and I'm willing. And if you're like yourself technical, then maybe you're going to be the one solving it. Where it gets even harder is the people that are doing it, but aren't really aware of their limitations. And then when it fails, troubleshooting is the highest order and the hardest thing to do. Building is easy. If you think that's hard, you're in a world of hurt. Troubleshooting when it doesn't work is the hardest. So it's one thing as boat owners to do things and do when things go well, but when they go south, then what? And that's the challenge too, is that these boaters then are on their own. They're, how are they going to troubleshoot this problem? Their wife, their son, their daughters, their girlfriend, could be anyone. They're like, so now what? What are we going to do? How do we get out of here? What happens? And you're like, you're at a whole new level of game. And so we do lithium. We absolutely do it, but we do it. And I vet it. I'm like, let's see if lithium is right for you.
Yeah.
Because, and also the last thing is money. I mean, you're going to drop some serious coin, not in necessarily the buying the battery, but you're going to drop some serious coin in doing everything around it.
Yep. Yeah, as I well know by the cost of my Balmar alternators, I now had to purchase. So
there you go.
Yeah, very good. One thing on lithiums though, there does seem. I mean, clearly there's been a lot of stuff in the press around lithium as a technology. There was the whole kind of Samsung thing a while back, and these kind of hoverboards all the kids were buying that kind of started catching fire and stuff like that. There is this kind of misconception that if you put lithium on your boat, then your boat is going to be this huge fire risk, and suddenly, they're going to miraculously self-destruct at any point. Is that true of like the kind of the chemistry that they're using for lithium on boat, or is that a different kind of lithium technology that they're using in kind of mobile phones and these hoverboards?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so that world I don't know. I know that they had the same thing on the Boeing, the Dreamliner.
Yeah.
I can't tell you because it's not my world.
Right.
But when we think about lithium, you're right. The BMS is everything, right? That's what the job of the BMS is there for, is to protect the battery from being in this sort of potentially self-destructive state. So what I recommend to people is you have all these people that are getting in the foray of getting into lithium. they're doing this in no-name companies, companies that basically, if they go down under, they're just going to change the, the name on the front. They've got no brand name recognition. There's nothing to lose for them. They don't have a brand name. They're selling on low price alone. And so what I tell people, I'm like, okay. And I was talking to a lagoon owner recently. I said to him, he was going to cheap out and buy the lowest cost lithium batteries out there. And I said, listen, you just bought a boat for over $1 million. These batteries are under your bed. You're going to sleep literally on top of these batteries. I said, buy a battery from a manufacturer that has something to lose. They care. And I've seen, let's say, for example, the big companies like Victron, Mastervolt, Lithionics, they're actually, that's it. Like if they go down and people sue them, they're going to lose a lot more than just selling lithium batteries. And so what I tell people is like, make sure they have a skin in the game, right? Make sure that they really care about that BMS, that they're not willing to take on risks, and that they're not going to release a product or a software version that isn't 100% been vetted, because it's a risk reward thing, right? Being sued could take down a company, right? And a bad name would take their whole product line out. So make sure that they're not cutting corners. And yes, it's not as attractive as some of maybe the budget battery choices, but the flip side is, very well that they're very much incented to not have any problems. And so it all depends as a boat owner is what our risk tolerance. Some people ride a motorcycle without a helmet. To them, that's not risk behavior. That's freedom.
Yep.
And so all of us as boaters have different risk tolerance. I'm definitely, as an engineer, more on the spectrum of, this is a recreational boat. There's no reason to put your life or the life of someone else in jeopardy on a recreational boat. If you can afford it, then you should afford to pay a little bit, maybe a premium, I say, to not have to worry.
Yep.
We haven't heard of fires. To me, you hear about them, but I haven't seen them locally. Yep. You hear about them. For me, it's more the reliability. I wouldn't be so much worried about the fact that they're going to catch on fire that often. I mean, I haven't seen it personally. No. But it would be that the system, you're going to have component failures around it, like you talked about, Neil, like the alternator, like all these other things that might be stopping you from boating.
Yeah, I think there's
a little bit of fear mongering there, but the flip side is it's healthy, because without that, you get people that are just going to jump ship. And then when people don't have a good boating experience, and it's your 1 week holiday or your only 2 week holiday, most people might give up boating. They might go, I'm out. This is so much easier to rent an Airbnb or just go to some island, just buy your experience, but not be responsible to fulfill it. And so that's where I have a little bit of hesitation with too easy.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I kind of learned through the research that I kind of did when we looked at it is, lithium is kind of a big umbrella, and there are lots of different chemistries. You've got lithium polymer, lithium ion, lithium phosphate, lithium cobalt, lithium titanate. And I think, so I mean, I used to fly, radio controlled, planes and helicopters, and that's kind of lithium polymer, and they are hugely powerful, but they will blow up at a moment's notice, and they will, like a firework. It's like a firecracker when those things go. But as far as I'm aware, the most of the kind of marine lithium, the Victrons and the main ones are lithium iron phosphate, which is kind of generally seen as being quite inert when it comes to that kind of explosive kind of tendencies that you've seen from this kind of umbrella of lithium that people kind of get a bit kind of worried about when you say lithium batteries. It's Boeing, Samsung, hoverboards. I think generally there is the fact that the chemistry that most companies are using is reasonably safe and as I say, quite inert when it comes to discharging and charging.
Yeah, it's absolutely the only ones we've used are the lithium iron phosphate batteries. Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to cover off with you, which I know is, so just watching some of your content is a pet peeve of yours, is around wiring, and you always talk about the difference between, is it welding cable, I think you call it, and people that go, I just put welding cable on there, versus kind of tin or marine wire. I guess it comes back to some of the points you've been making about you want to don't cheap out, and the boat you want to be able to use it, but just kind of talk us through kind of wiring a little bit, and again why should we use proper marine core cable versus, welding cable, and fusing, because again, I know that's another point that you see a lot. Just talk us through that a little bit and give us some kind of best practices around that.
Yeah. So as boaters, we're always both budget and time constrained. We know that that's in our whole life. It's not just, at homes, in our business, in our lives, for everything. And so with this sort of crunch of time, we want to do more. A lot of people end up just doing and doing what's available. So it's going to be either choosing the wrong size cable or choosing the cable of all the same color. I can't tell you how many boats I've gone where everything is all black. And it works. They're absolutely right. It absolutely works. You can absolutely, the color of the wire does not affect the conductivity of it. That being said, troubleshooting, removing a piece of equipment and then having two black wires, and you're like, which one do I reconnect to the new piece of equipment that I removed? Now everything becomes context, right? It's sort of like everybody could drive on the left side or the right side of the road, and you in England do it differently than we do in North America. But it's about consistency, right? It's about being predictable. Because if we both use both sides of the road, there would be no road. Just simply, we get to a stalemate. And so color is important, and following the code is important, because a lot of people, I hear them, they say, oh, well, I know which one it is. I'm like, oh, so you know the context. You have to know that this cable was on the left, this cable was on the right. When you remove an equipment or you troubleshoot, now you've got to keep the cables left and right. And I'm like, how? But to them, it's like, oh, well, I just need to buy one reel. Instead of buying a reel and cable of red and let's say yellow or red and black, I'm just going to buy one all red. I'm going to save on the cable, less scrap. It's going to be really hard to maintain. So that's one thing, is color coding is absolutely essential. If you want a world of hurt and a world of pain, you don't do it. But I strongly suggest that people follow the code. There's a really good reason for that. It makes it much easier in the future. The next is the type of wiring. People buy these welding cables and think that, they're getting a deal. Well, no, the manufacturers are not making higher margin on welding cable or less and more on marine. They're just different types of cabling. And we've got to remember on a boat, and I've seen this, welding cables, a welder doesn't sort of buy a cable and say, hey, babes, I bought this cable. It's going to last me 50 years. Pop had it. Now it's my turn.
I'm going to get down.
Years. Yeah, it's going to be a family legacy. It's a big investment, huge investment. This cable is a wear and tear item. It's going to last a year, 2 years. I don't know. They're just going to chuck it away. It's meaningless. It's just like whatever. It's like a coffee cup. Just buy another one. But on a boat, once you put a wire on a boat, the chance of you removing that wire and doing a wire refresh on a boat is zero. Yep. It's never going to happen. Nobody ever does wire refresh. If you did that, nobody could afford boating. No one. It means a rewire of the boat. So I've seen welding cable that literally over time, it looks like an orange, like a tangerine. Like it literally is not only, I'm not talking about cracking. I'm talking like it peeled off.
Wow.
It literally is now sort of the jacket is become brittle because it's been there for 15, 20 years. And then and now you're seeing, I had a work boat where luckily they would have, the boat would be gone if it hit on the positive, but it was the negative. The hull was actually carrying part of the negative current on an aluminum boat because the jacket had become brittle over time. And now they had crazy corrosion problems on that boat because one of the cables was actually, going onto the hull. So that's one reason why you wouldn't do welding cable. The other reason why you wouldn't do welding cable is that jacket actually, if it becomes ever in contact with oil or fuel, will actually melt off. Right. So now you have a jacket. It's like going out in the rain, and then over time that jacket is literally going to disappear off your back. You're like, oh well, yeah, I should have. So I've seen welding cable where there was a fuel drip landing, fuel filters are above it, where the jacket of the welding cable was gone. The only reason it didn't short is that it was properly affixed every 6 inches. Right. And because of the stiffness of welding cable, the two cables were literally an inch away, a couple of centimeters away from one another, and the jacket was gone on both. When they touch, if there's no fuse, it's basically game over. So that's another reason. The other reason is that corrosion. It's a boat is not a super, again, healthy environment for electrical conductivity. And so all the strands are untinned. Also, the other big challenge is the stiffness of the wire. Boats vibrate. So you've got all these cons, right? And you're going, if you're aware of all these cons and you do a welding cable, good on you. There's no harm. You're making an informed decision. And that's a choice. You're like, I hear all this, but I need to buy the lowest cost cable. That to me is important. And there's a reason for that. My take on it is a little bit different. And I say, okay, these are all negative. What is the time to put a cable in a boat? Do I ever want to do it again? Do I want to make 2 steps forward and 1 step back? And that's where I go, no, it's not worth it. Not worth it at all. We got to put good stuff so that there's so much things that break on a boat that you don't want to have shorter life cycles. Go, I'm going to have to do that faster. And that's why I'm big on, making sure the connections are properly crimped, putting heat shrink, right? All these things matter because you want to make sure that your boat is reliable. So that's my take between a welding cable and marine thin cable. The strands are much smaller. They're much more flexible. Honestly, I would personally never put a welding cable, even if I was told to. There's no way.
Against your religion.
I would do it. But some people do. Some people do. But I just, it's a choice, but I wouldn't do that. Never.
And fusing, I know they say it's a big thing for you as well. So again, here's one for you then. So you talk about, I've watched some videos. You talk about fusing the cable, not necessarily fusing the device, but fusing the cable. Does the fuse go next to the device, or does the fuse go next to the battery? Where should people be putting the fuses? So again, let's say we've got an alternator. Do you put it near the alternator? Do you put it near the battery? If we've got a searchlight, do we put it near the searchlight? Do we put it near the battery? Which end? I'm playing the devil's advocate here, but where would you put the fuse?
Yeah, well, the fuse, if there's going to be only one fuse, it has to be at the start of the circuit, and it has to. So you think about, and it's funny. This is such a confusing topic.
I know.
It's so confusing. Honestly, if you're listening to this and you're confused, welcome to the club. It's confusing for a lot of us. But here's what we need to think about. When we think about our homes, buildings, everything, it's absolutely either criminal or negligent and you couldn't do it. I mean, you would lose everything. In North America, you're talking done. You can never, ever, 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 ever energize a circuit without a circuit breaker anywhere. Like that's literally having TNT and having, rags full of oil and paint in a corner or what happened and just waiting for an accident to happen. It's not a single trades person would ever, it's not inconceivable. It would never happen, right? But what happens on boats is it's interesting. That whole philosophy, everything that we've learned about avoiding electrical fires on land, for some reasons, get lost as soon as we go on the water. And it's sort of like, oh, that's good for land. Oh, and by the way, land means also your car. Every circuit on your car is fused. Everything is fused, right? And the fuse block is not near the tail light, where's the fuse block? It's at the start of the circuit. It's one location and everything fans out. So the challenge is what happens is people get confused and they think, oh, I have a fuse, or I have a fuse on the battery, or I have a fuse on the panel. But what they're not realizing is not all fuses protect all wires. Fuses are sized for both an appliance and the maximum amperage that a cable can handle. And if you take a fuse and you rate a fuse, for example, for 100 amps and the cable is only rated for 30 and the appliance is only rated for 50.
Your cable's in a fuse.
It's not a fuse. It's better than the wire. That's right. And as a boat owner, I'm like, why would you? Now, I can imagine myself sometimes I imagine myself as not commercial, but a fisherman in a small village. And I'm trying to put food on my table and I am in a sort of sustenance sort of mode. And I'm like, life is hard. Yeah, maybe they can't afford to, they're just getting out there. They're going to try to make a living. That's different. They do what they can with what they have. But for the rest of us that are recreational boaters, why would you, and this is what I tell people all the time, I'm like, when you invite someone on your boat, you're inviting them into your risk tolerance. They don't know that. Normal human beings are assuming that everything around us is relatively safe. You know, you don't sit on a couch and it's super combustible. There's a reason why the materials that build a couch, they learned that, right? They don't want this thing to have a cigarette land on it, flashes up in a bang. So why would we tolerate a lower risk or higher risk on a boat? And then the problem is that the people that are coming on that boat, either your guest or the next owner, don't realize that risk tolerance. And that's why it's not up to everyone to make that decision. You can't build your car based to your risk tolerance. Oh, I don't need seatbelts. Oh yeah, you do handbrake. I don't do handbrake. Tail lights. I don't do that. Headlights. You don't do that. Signaling. Don't worry about that. And then the next owner would buy the car, assume that these things are there, not knowing that they're there. And then that's where it gets really hard. Their risk tolerance is different. And so for me, is like establish baseline. Let's not take undue risk, unnecessary risk. A fuse is not a $5,000 line item, right? And so you fuse all the circuits and you fuse them always at the source of power.
Right. What's
confusing is this. You buy a VHF radio, and the VHF radio has a fuse connected to the radio. And you're like, oh, it has a fuse. So then they're like, oh, but the cable's not long enough to go to the battery. So then they run a long cable all the way to the battery. And they're like, oh, my circuit is fused. Well, no, the circuit's not fused. The circuit from the moment the fuse starts to the radio. To the radio, yep. But everything from the battery up to there is infused. And I've got videos on YouTube that show that. And that fuse will never blow if the short is in between the battery and the fuse. So if ever the wires chafe, you know, I don't know, you're putting two pieces of structure together and you squish them and they connect, a screw, whatever it is, now you're in a world of hurt. So the fuse has to be the power source. And generally on a boat for DC, that is basically, it starts at the battery. And every time you change cable size and you go from a larger cable to a smaller cable, then you have to bring new fuse sizes because you fuse for a wire and an appliance. Right. And the VHF radio might be powered from a 15 amp breaker, let's say on the DC panel, but the manufacturer of the radio is going to say, I want a 5 amp or 7 amp or whatever it is, 8 amp or 10 amp, and I want a 10 amp fuse for the appliance. So you'll literally have sometimes a circuit breaker for the wire at the start of the circuit from the panel, and then a smaller fuse that is extremely tailored, exactly what the manufacturer wants for the radio. So you'll have a fuse for the appliance and a fuse and a circuit breaker or a fuse for the wire. Nice. And that's the approach. And it's important to remember that a lot of people talk about this code as this sort of ideal, where it's this thing,
utopian vision of
yeah, it's like either our health or eating habits. Oh yeah, well you shouldn't have that, but that's what they say. But you know you can compromise. Yeah. No, the code is, and I don't understand. I remember even getting the boating industry like, well, the code is just for those naysayers. Then I realized is these people are propagating these lies. The code is not an ideal. It's the foundation. It's the bare minimum. And yet you've got these boaters that are going, oh, no, don't worry about that. What they're telling you is they're saying, I don't worry about anything, which most likely in a lot of cases means I'm not really thinking about it. Because if you don't think about something, you're not going to worry about it. And there's whatever happens, it happens. But again, what are the consequences of a boat fire versus a house fire? You know, we know what fires can do when you don't have exits. It happened in England. If you're on the ground and there's a fire, you can run through the window, come on the other side, sure, if you're on the ground floor. But how many doors and windows that you can leave on a boat are there? And when there's a fire on a boat, is this sort of like a marshmallow fire, a little camp, and you have a little bit of smoke and you're like, oh, no, this is complete whiteout. We're talking, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Like it's not fog. It's you first can't breathe, can't see. And then you have to get out of your boat. And if the fire is near the companionway, near the door, so where are you going to go out? And then once you're out of the boat, where are you going? You know, are you at the dock or are you at an anchorage? Is your dinghy down? Oh, now you jump in the water. Okay, you jump in the water. What's the water like? Is it cold? Is it warm? Are you far from shore? Now your boat's down. Can you swim to shore? Is there another boat? All these things, it's sort of the bar needs to be higher on the water because of all the things I talked about. And yet it's the opposite.
It's crazy.
And that's my pet peeve. It's like, why settle, take on more risk in an environment where it's already riskier to begin with? And that's why, I'm a big harper on everything has to be fused. Like, why would you not do that? And I hope that my explanations resonate to boaters so that they can take the time to go on their boat and see, was my previous owner, a high risk taker? Because maybe I'm not. And what risks do they take on my boat that now I own, that I now bought from them? And am I willing to have their risk tolerance? And Neil, I say this all the time to boat owners. I say, when you buy a boat, you're not buying a boat, you're buying a previous owner's sort of level of care, their level of everything. It's not the boat that you buy, because you can buy a boat from a manufacturer, that's different. But once it's left that factory and it's been owned by multiple owners, you're buying that. How much have they been loved, taken care of? What was their risk tolerance? Do you align in terms of your prioritization for maintenance? Some people never touch something until it breaks. That's their philosophy. If it ain't break, don't touch it. Well, we know on boats, yes, that could be an adage. Some other of us go, okay, well, there's maintenance cycles. You've got to change your pencil zinc on your heat exchanger. You don't wait for your heat exchanger to sort of corrode and have basically your coolant mixing with your hot water, from the ocean. You're not going to wait for that. So there's a lot of preventative things that we can do. And these owners are some of them don't care. It's not that they can't afford it. They just can't be bothered. So fusing is one of these things that you want to make sure that if your previous owner didn't care, maybe you do, have a gander, have a look.
It is fascinating. And so after watching, literally after watching some of your videos, I started going around going, where's the fuses? And looking on our boat. Again, ours is 2000, it's just 21 years old now. And clearly, the technology back in 2000 is certainly different to where we are in 2021. We've updated the navigation equipment and all that kind of stuff. So again, it really is so fascinating to look back and to do that preventative maintenance now and to look at it through a different pane of glass to say, exactly as you said, why do we need the fusing? And, let's say, why hasn't it been put in there? Why wasn't it? It's just someone just go, oh yeah, we'll just whack this searchlight in, whack this radio in, whack this whatever in, and just tap it into any kind of 12-volt circuit they can find and get their hands on, versus actually doing
that's what they're doing
properly.
That's the bar.
Piggybacking on it somewhere.
And the challenge with that is, and I was saying this, I say this all the time. I say, what we're doing there is we're sabotaging our own dreams. Having an unreliable or a boat that, things, because not all fires are catastrophic, but I've seen, owners that have had boat fires where, it didn't take the whole boat down, but it takes them out of boating. Yeah. It's over, and now that part of them, some of us wanted to boat forever. It's not something we just kind of happen to do. It's sort of like, oh, I'm going to wear brown shoes or black shoes. Well, I don't know. I'll just try it. Some of us, it's something we've really wanted to do. And if your boat or a boat does that to you and crushes your dream like that and you get out, I say to people, that's sad. That's really sad to have people lose their dreams because we're taking stupid shortcuts for really no benefit. It's unfortunate.
I don't want to end on a dreary note. It's fascinating. Again, we could talk about this kind of stuff for ages. For people who want to learn more about this, we've kind of piqued their appetite and they want to learn more. Where's the best place that they can go and hear more? Again, where can they see more content from you? How can they get in touch with you? How can they ask you questions on your show? Where's the best place and way to get in contact with you guys?
Yeah, so this whole sharing of knowledge, you can Google on YouTube, search on the bar for Pacific Yacht Systems. We've got courses. Some courses are 12 hours. We've got a bunch of 12-hour courses, boat show presentations, lots. Ask PYS. So that's one format, is certainly looking through the videos that we have on YouTube. The other thing too is we invite people to go to our website. We're at over probably 1,100 web pages.
Wow.
We don't really sell stuff on the website. It's not at all a website for selling. It's more, again, sharing of information. So we have all the articles that we've published in magazines. We used to write all these columns for monthly magazines. So they're all there and they're available. So you can find all that sort of geeking out, I call, and before you do educate. So all that there is there on our websites. And then further to that is then people, like you were saying, Neil, at the beginning, some people are going to see all this. They're going to say, great, 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 but I need help.
Yep.
Can you help us, and that's where that's the fastest growing part of our business is the consultation and design. We probably did over 400 of those consultation design engagements last year where we're actually building, not necessarily the electrical, but we're actually creating a plan to build. So boat builders, do-it-yourselfers, and these boat owners are everywhere around the world, across the United States, Asia, the Middle East, England, Europe, Spain, Italy,
Wow.
Any country, it doesn't matter where the boats are, we're supporting them saying, okay, well, maybe you want to have a conversation, pros and cons of what you want to do, because that's already hard. How do you make a choice of where you're going to go? And then it's like, well, how do I actually go about executing that? So we offer those sort of consultation and design services to boat owners, but that's really after and it's not for everyone. I'd say 99.9% of the people that are going to read our content are going to listen to it. They're going like, oh, great. I'm good. I'm going to go. But there is a segment of those boat owners are like, I'd like to have you in my corner. Can you come and help me and support me as I go through this journey and figure out what's right for my boat and for my budget, and help me make sense of all my choices, and then give me a plan that I can either pass on to an electrician locally, so they're not just sort of doing, and I can also inspect and make sure that they're doing it according to a strategy. And it's funny, I tell people all the time, I'm like, have you ever seen how often is there greatness without a plan? Haphazard happens, of course, we have examples, but most things in life, homes, buildings, anything, all these were planned. They were put on paper. They were thought about first, and then you execute. And as a boat owner, I invite all of us to educate first, plan, and then do, and not skip that most important step of actually planning or thinking about what you're going to do before we do it.
That's awesome. Jeff, thank you ever so much for getting up early and joining us on the show.
Hey, no problem.
Being the expert. I definitely want to get you back. There's a whole bunch of other topics. Again, I think we've just scratched the surface with this session here. Thank you all for watching and joining us on the show. We'd love to hear your comments and your feedbacks. Who would you like to get on? What topics would you like us to cover on these sessions? A lot of us are in lockdown. Certainly here in the UK, we can't actually go boating. So this is as close as we can get to at least talk about the hobby that we love. So again, please reach out and let us know. Hit the subscribe and ring that bell notification. Head over to Pacific Yacht Systems as well. Look at some of their great content, that great video, and I'll catch you on the next one. Stay safe. How was that?
Perfect.
You like it?
Awesome.